John came to see me, distraught, nervous, anxious, tearful. He was afraid his marriage was about to end. He came to my office as a last resort, hoping to find answers, hoping to save his marriage, hoping to find peace. This was John's second marriage. He had gotten married a few months after his first marriage had ended. John recounted how during his first marriage his wife had cheated on him several times, eventually resulting in divorce and any loss of hope for reconciliation. He had been devastated and heartbroken, hurt. And while recovering from the brokenness of his first marriage, he met Sue. And they began to date and fell in love, and shortly thereafter he got married. But John's heart was fearful, insecure, afraid of another betrayal. He remembered how bad it hurt when his first wife cheated on him, and this fear infected his heart and his marriage. He became controlling and jealous, monitoring his wife all the time, calling her 10 to 15 times per day to check up on where she was and what she was doing, accusing her of actions not taken. If he saw her talking to a man, he became angry and insisted she not talk to a man for any reason without his permission. And if she did need to talk to a man, she needed to go through him, and he would ask her questions. He began to tell her where she could go and what she could do. As you might guess, the marriage was dying. Whatever love had existed in the marriage was eroding. Whatever fondness had been in Sue's heart was being replaced by resentment. John didn't understand. He didn't know why. He didn't know what was going on. John is not alone. I have many patients who come in situations similar to John's, in marriages and relationships that are dying, that are being destroyed, in which love is failing, and they don't know why. In this universe, there are certain principles or certain laws which govern our existence. In John's case, there was a law that maybe you've heard of, maybe you haven't. It's called the law of liberty. Now, when I say law, I'm not talking about some legislative enactment or some rule put in place by a powerful potentate. I'm talking about a principle upon which things in the universe are designed to run. The same type of law or the same order as the law of gravity. Now, I'm sure everybody here has heard of the law of gravity, and if I were to ask you, tell me, which government at the United Nations decided to pass the law of gravity? Yes, you would laugh, because you understand that is a principle upon which things in the universe run, and it's not up to a legislative body to pass that law. The law of liberty is on this order. Now think about the law of gravity for a moment. Do you have to believe in gravity for gravity to work in your life? Do you have to know about gravity for gravity to work? If you were to deny there is such a thing as gravity, you climb to the top of a building, step off saying, I don't believe in gravity, I deny its existence, will gravity care? No, it still works. It's very predictable. Now think about that. If there's any young people, I see some young people in here. If I were to take my pen and let go, how many of you have confidence that you know what would happen? Yes, and where does that confidence come from? Does it come from reading a book? Does it come from a rule that somebody told you about? Or does it come from experience that this is so predictable, so reliable, you've seen it so many times that you have no doubt what will happen? The only variable with violating gravity is degree. Step off a 4-inch curb, you twist an ankle. Step off a 40-foot building, you're going to die. But notice, gravity is doing the exact same thing in both places. The law of liberty is on this order. And let me walk you through it. It's very predictable. There are consequences that occur if you violate it. And let's give some examples so you can see. Imagine a young man who is dating a woman, and after months of dating, he is convicted that this is the one he wants to spend his life with. So he takes her out to a nice restaurant, goes for a walk in the park, and gets down on a knee and proposes. She is fond of him, but isn't quite to the certainty that he is at. So she asks for a little while to think through her answer. Well, he becomes insecure. He stands up, he pulls out a pistol, he puts it to her head and says, no, look, I spent my time on you, I spent my money on you. You better marry me and you better love me or I will kill you. If he were to do that, now of course this is an extreme example, but if he were to do that, what would happen in her heart? Would she go, oh, finally a strong man who will take care of me? No, you understand. The first predictable consequence that occurs when liberties are violated is that love is always damaged. Second consequence, do you think she wants to snuggle with the guy, or do you think she wants to get away as fast as she can? Get away. Second consequence, a desire to rebel is instilled in the heart. Love is always damaged and will eventually be destroyed. A desire to rebel is always instilled in the heart. Imagine you're out with your spouse this weekend, and you're out to a restaurant, and the waiter comes up and says, "What would you like to drink?" You said, "I'd like a Coca-Cola, please." And your spouse looks to the waiter, not to you, and says, "She's not allowed to have Coke. You bring her milk." Do you go, "Oh, he's just looking out for my health"? Do you love him more, or does love get bruised? Do you want to go snuggle, or maybe go get a table by yourself? Okay? Now, you'll notice the direction here. If this is the only time something like this has ever happened in your marriage, it's not going to end your relationship, but it will twist the ankle. If your spouse pulls out a gun and puts it to your head, maybe it's like stepping off a 40-foot building. That relationship may be over. There's a third consequence that occurs. If you're in a situation in which liberties are being violated, the desire to rebel is being instilled, but you have the option of getting out. But rather than getting out, you choose to stay and surrender in that situation. The third consequence occurs, and that is over time, your individuality is slowly eroded and destroyed. Your ability to think and reason for yourself, your autonomy and self-governance is being erased, and you slowly become what I call a shadow person, a shadow of the one you've surrendered to. Shirley came to see me. She was referred by our primary care physician for depression. It was very difficult to get a history from her. When she came into my office, she didn't make any eye contact. When I asked her questions, she would answer questions with, I don't know. For many, many minutes, difficult to get any details. But slowly, over time, she began to disclose that she'd been in a marriage in which her husband physically abused her and beat her. And she told me one story that her husband told her he wanted dinner ready at 5 o'clock. So she worked in the kitchen diligently, put dinner on the table a few minutes after 5. And that's when her husband began to hit her. And he began to punch her. And he said, "I hate it when you make me do this. Why do you make me do this? If you would have dinner ready on time, I wouldn't have to hit you. I only hit you because I love you." And I expressed some disgust at the description that she was giving of what her husband had said. And that's when she looked up at me and made eye contact with me for the first time, and she said, "Oh no, it wasn't his fault. If I would have had dinner ready on time, he wouldn't have had to hit me." Was she thinking for herself? No. She had lost her individuality. She had lost the ability to think and to reason for herself, and she was seeing the world through the lens of her husband's mind. She had become a shadow of her husband. Most people in relationships today don't use real physical guns. They use what I call emotional guns. If you don't do what your spouse wants you to do, you may get hollered at. You may get criticized. You may get the door slammed. There may be stomping, pouting, ugly attitudes. That you're in a relationship where you feel pressure to perform. And if you don't perform, there's a price that you're going to have to pay. And so you begin to see the world through the lens of the controlling spouse. Your friends ask you if you want to go play golf, and rather than looking at your schedule, seeing what conflicts, what finances are, and making a judgment based on the facts, you think, what will my wife say? How will she react? Will she be mad? Will it be okay? Do you see the world through the lens of your spouse, or do you see the world as an independent person? Violations of liberty always destroy love, incite rebellion. And if freedom isn't restored over time, individuality is destroyed. Love cannot exist in an atmosphere without freedom. Now you might be saying, okay, this is making sense. I can see that. I can test that. I can go to my home, and this is actually very scientific, if you didn't realize that. This is predictable. It's reproducible. Anybody who doesn't believe that this is a law, try it on your loved one. You will find how predictable and reproducible this is. But as you think about it, you might be going, okay, but then what about the Old Testament? I mean, if violations of liberty, if using coercive pressure, if using power and might is damaging, then how do we understand the Old Testament? Well, let's look at some of those stories. How about the story of the flood? Incredible use of power here. The whole world is wiped out except for 8. And what was the consequence in the aftermath of that? After the flood, as the world begins to be populated again, what are the people doing but building the Tower of Babel? And why are they building the Tower of Babel? Because they don't believe there is a God, or because they don't trust him? They're rebelling. What about the 10 plagues of Egypt? 10 plagues of Egypt, the parting of the waters, the children of Israel walked through on dry ground, the Pharaoh's army is destroyed, a pillar of fire by night, a cloud by day, thunderings at Sinai. Wow, we've got a lot of power and might going on. And what were they doing a short while later but having an orgy around a golden calf? Was friendship being restored? Was trust and unity with God occurring? What about Mount Carmel? Elijah calls fire down from heaven, and all the people fall and they say, "The Lord, he is God. The Lord, he is God." And after that was the history of the children of Israel, faithfulness and loyalty and friendship, or were they right back into rebellion again? Wow. Every time God used might and power, did he get what he wanted? Restore trust, unity, and friendship. And so we read in Zechariah chapter 4, verse 6, "Not by might nor by power, but by the Spirit, says the Lord." Okay, well, you're confusing me now, because, if God in Zechariah says not by might nor by power, then why was he using all that might and power? If it's not reconciling, if it's not healing, if it's not restoring, if it's not winning us back to trust, then why is he doing it? Well, a loving parent will sometimes use extreme measures in emergency situations. In northwest Georgia, near where I live, there is a state park called Cloudian Canyon. And it gets its name for the steep canyon walls. Now, I want you to imagine you're there with your 10-year-old son. And he meets another 10-year-old boy for the first time, and he has a Frisbee, and they're playing Frisbee. And you see your son looking up, chasing the Frisbee, heading for the cliff. Now, he's too far for you to reach. What would you do? Would you shout, "Stop the cliff"? But he's laughing. He doesn't hear you. Would you shout louder? But the wind is blowing. He doesn't hear you. Do you shout at the top of your lungs, "Stop, I said stop now"? Might you even say, "Stop or I'm going to beat you within an inch of your life"? And so your son finally stops. And some hikers on the other side of the canyon hear you, and they say, "Man, what a cruel parent. I would never treat my child like that." And then afterwards, your son says to his new playmate, "Hey, I want you to come meet my parent." And the playmate says, "I don't think I want to meet your parent. They sound awful mean. Why don't you go talk to your parent and see if you can still play? I'll wait here and you tell me what they say." And we understand a little bit about what was going on at Sinai. God is thundering at Sinai. And the children of Israel said, "Moses, don't let God talk to us. You talk to God and then you come talk to us." And you can read right in Exodus chapter 20. Moses said, "But there's no need to be afraid." Your son would say to the friend, "But there's no need to be afraid of my parent." Why is your son not afraid? Why is the strange boy, the strange friend that just picked up, afraid? Why was Moses not afraid in the same situation that the children of Israel were afraid? Why was God raising his voice and thundering? Were they heading for a cliff of idolatry which would destroy their soul? In August 7, 2006, Morning Edition, NPR's Morning Edition, reporter John Hendren reported on sectarian strife in Iraq. He told of a story about a grocer and his 3 employees who were shot in the head and firebombed, and the store was firebombed because they did not display their vegetables in the proper manner. You see, a local cleric had put out a fatwa, an edict, that you cannot stand up celery stalks next to tomatoes, lest someone misperceive that as an erect male. And if you do, it is a crime punishable by death. And so the grocer and his 3 employees were shot and killed in the store firebombed. Now, I want you to imagine that you were the new magistrate appointed to govern Baghdad. In your judgment, which is more serious, standing up celery stalks next to tomatoes or driving drunk? In your judgment, driving drunk. And so you decide to put out for driving drunk the offense: suspension of license, 30 days in jail, $500 fine. But in their mind, they think standing celery stalks next to tomatoes is a crime punishable by death. Which will they think is more serious? Celery stalks by tomatoes. You get death penalty for that. You only get a $500 fine and 30 days in jail for driving drunk. So if you want them to think that driving drunk is at least as serious as standing up the celery stalks next to tomatoes, what penalty will you have to give it? Now you understand why God, in the Old Testament, death for violating the Sabbath, death for talking back to your parents, death for collecting sticks on the Sabbath, death for adultery, death, death, death. Why? Because God preferred it that way? No, because their minds were so darkened. Because they believed that death was appropriate. We still have that same mentality going on in the Middle East today. During World War II, a troop ship was crossing the Atlantic. It got hit by a torpedo and was taking on water, and the troops were billeted below the deck. And the water was rushing into where the troops were. The officers on deck opened the deck hatches, and troops were trying to climb the deck. But as one soldier would get on the ladder, 2 or 3 others would pull him off. There was abject panic going on below. The officers were trying to shout for order. But there was so much chaos, they didn't listen. And suddenly, in the midst of all the chaos, bam, 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 one of the officers fired his weapon down, killing several of the soldiers. But order was restored, and the rest of the soldiers were able to get out. This might have been what was happening during the flood? What was happening on the earth during the flood? What was God's goal? Once man fell into sin, what was God's purpose? What was God's agenda? What was God's goal? Was it not to save the world and secure the universe? Is that not his goal? Colossians 1:18. All things in heaven and earth are reconciled to Christ at the cross through the shedding of his blood. God had a big plan to save the world entirely and secure the universe. But at the time of the flood, how many people were still willing to work with God during that time? Well, it says there was only one righteous man on the earth, and his 7 family members got to go in the ark with him. But there was only one righteous man on the whole earth, Noah. We'd gotten down to one. Everybody else wasn't even willing to work with God except that one man. The avenue through which the Messiah would come to redeem the world was getting very, very narrow. God had to take emergency measures to keep open the avenue, lest that one man be lost and the avenue for the Messiah to come. Excuse me. But we don't need to understand that in the same way what God did there as the wages of sin, death. I want you to imagine that you have 10 children. 5 of them are over the age of 20. 5 of them are under the age of 7. The 5 over the age of 20 are wild, rebellious, drug addicts, child molesters, abusers, murderers, and every time you try to reason with them, they actually try and kill you. They are that out of control. And now they're working on your little children because they want to molest your younger kids. They want to introduce drugs to your younger kids, and they're working to pervert and destroy them. If you had the ability as the parent to put them in cryogenic storage, not kill them, just freeze them in time, long enough for your other children to grow up and then thaw them out and let them live their life, would you do it? To protect your younger kids. That's all God did, you understand, when he put his children to sleep in the Old Testament. It says, Jesus says in the New Testament that there will be a resurrection of righteous and a resurrection of damnation. Everybody's coming up out of the grave. God simply said, okay, this is getting too out of control. My few righteous children are going to be destroyed. I've got to put some of you in timeout. Just going to freeze you in time till the healing plan can be carried forward. And then I'll thaw you out, and you can finish whatever you're going to do in your ugly and distorted ways. And there's a resurrection of damnation at the end of time. Saul of Tarsus did not understand this. Think about the methods that Saul of Tarsus used. Coercion, imprisonment, beating, torture. But then he saw Christ. On Damascus Road, he saw Christ. He spent time with him. And after his conversion, Paul the Apostle, when disputes came up about religious matters in Romans chapter 14, wrote, "Let every person be fully persuaded in their own mind." And in Ephesians chapter 4, we present the truth in love, and we leave people free. His methods changed. And this is exactly how God works. He presents the truth in love, and he leaves us free. He gives us the evidence demonstrating to win us back. Go back with me to the beginning. In heaven, as you heard, Lucifer left God's presence, the light bearer. He leaves God's presence and he begins to prevaricate, the father of lies. He begins to tell lies about God himself. God isn't good. God is powerful, but he's not trustworthy. In fact, he will use his power to coerce. He'll use his power to intimidate. He'll use his power to destroy. If you don't do what he wants, he'll use his power to hurt you. And as these lies are running through the angelic host, as they're debating the issues back and forth, what would a powerful being do to restore order? Can God use his power and might to refute the idea that he uses his power falsely? What would you do? You see the problem. And so God, the great teacher that he is, the great revealer of truth that he is, began to demonstrate. And he said, let there be light. Let the firmament come forth. Let the land come forth. And on day 6 he said, let us make man in our image. Let them be fruitful and multiply. And as the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit come into unity and create, a new species was created. 2 separate beings coming together in the unity of love and creating new beings in their image. And he told them, be fruitful and multiply in this world before sin. And what would the universe have learned if Adam and Eve would have followed through? What would this universe have learned if they would have stayed faithful and had children in a world without sin? Would they have seen Adam and Eve abusing, lording over, dominating, power-mongering over their children? Or would they have seen Adam and Eve giving constantly of themselves for the health, welfare, and beneficence of their kids? And the universe would have gone, oh, I get it. God didn't create us to lord over us and abuse us, but he's giving of himself constantly for our health and welfare. This is the high calling that this creation was created to do. We were the repository of God's very nature and character of love. We were created as a species to reveal the truth about God, to refute the lies that Satan had been telling in heaven. But God didn't stop there. You're that angel in heaven, and after he's creating, think how much power it took to create. We can take on this planet today a few grams of matter. We can turn that matter back into energy, and we call that a nuclear explosion. Just a few grams, nuclear explosion. How much energy then did it take to make the entire planet? To make all the planets of the solar system, to make the sun of the solar system. Man, this was an incredible display of might and power. And so you're that angel in heaven, and as you're watching this display of might and power, Lucifer's lies are running through your head, and you're going, oh man, I wonder if he's just flexing his muscles. I wonder if he's just trying to intimidate us. In fact, he just made some new intelligent beings. I wonder if he's telling us we better get in line or else he can wipe us out in an instant and replace us with somebody else. And as those lies are going through your head, God says, universe, you have heard the allegations against us. You have seen the evidence that we have just given. Now, universe, take 24 hours aside. I rest my case. What does it say about God? Now think about this. What does it say about God that in the context of an assault on his right to rule, in the context of an assault on his right to govern, that rather than use his might and power to force every knee in the universe to bow, he creates a day for freedom to think and come to your own conclusion. The fact that the Sabbath exists is actually evidence that with God you're free. And he will not use his power to coerce and control. You see, we have a day because the earth rotates on its axis. We have a month because the moon circles around the earth. We have a year because the earth circles around the sun. We have a 7-day week because at the end of that week, there is a shining light, a beacon in the darkness promised by God that with him you're free. Remember the Sabbath to keep it holy. Remember the freedom that you have with me. Don't get caught into the coercive powers. Don't get caught into the abuse. God's kingdom is the kingdom of truth, presented in love, leaving people free. Now, while there are many arguments about what that beast system in Revelation is, no one argues how it functions. It functions through coercive power. They can neither buy nor sell. save him who has the mark of the beast. God's kingdom is the kingdom of freedom. The beast system is the system of coercive control. You might be saying, but what about Christ? I mean, if violations of the law of liberty always destroy love, then why didn't Christ stop loving when he was arrested, when he was bound, when he was beaten, when he was crucified? The short answer, because it was not done against his will. When Peter tried to talk him out of it in the upper room, Christ said, "Get behind me, Satan." When Peter pulled out a sword and struck off Malchus's ear, Christ restored the ear and said to Peter, "Put up the sword. Do you think I cannot call my Father, and at once he will put at my disposal more than 12 legions of angels? But how then would the scriptures be fulfilled that says it must happen this way?" He said, "No one can take my life. I will lay it down, and I will take it up again." Jesus didn't go through the cross against his will. Creatures cannot kill the Creator unless the Creator permits it. He wasn't some helpless human up there like the two thieves. Don't get in your head that he was simply a helpless human. If anybody remembers that show, Bewitched, she could twinkle her nose and make things happen, or I Dream of Jeannie, she'd blink her eyes and make things happen. Jesus didn't have to blink his nose or twinkle his eyes. All he had to do was think it, be gone, and they would have been gone. What does it say about God? That the Creator would stand there with all that power at his disposal and not use it to protect himself. Can you trust a God like that? And thus you see in Revelation, after the resurrection, as the heavenly scene is shot, you see the heavenly beings falling down and going, "Worthy, worthy, worthy is the Lamb who was slain." He's worthy to have the power because he's demonstrated he's the only one safe with the power. And as I see Jesus hanging there on that cross, as I see him fighting for your freedom and mine, as I see him voluntarily giving himself to secure the universe, as I see his life ebbing away, the pain on his face, as I hear the cry from his lips, I'm reminded of words spoken actually by our 35th president. But I want you to hear them as if God is speaking them from heaven to you. "Let every nation know, whether it wishes us well or ill, we shall pay any price, bear any burden, meet any hardship, support any friend, oppose any foe to assure the survival and success of liberty." Oh, Father, and Jesus, you have paid the ultimate price, borne the ultimate burden, met the ultimate hardship, opposed the ultimate foe to set us free and ensure freedom will always reign. We praise you and honor you and open our hearts and minds to you now. Restore in us your character and love so that we may live as you live, presenting the truth in love and leaving others free. In your holy name, amen.